All right. This is Matt Singleton, Bob Smack, and we are going over Jonathan Burris in a series where I've been refuting a lot of his arguments against the King James only. And in this one, he is dealing with a guy named Jack McElroy. And Jack McElroy, he has a book, What Bible Would Jesus Use? I could have that a little bit wrong. I think that's about right. And the the contention was that McElroy, he always does Bible version comparison, and he shows in the ESV where it says that it talks about a wicked person, and that the wicked person is always successful. And this is actually more than just the ESV, but he points that out. And in the King James, it says, uh, his ways are always grievous. Okay. And so Jonathan Burris is about to go on and try to refute this idea. Um, Before I get involved with that, let me kind of touch a couple things. Now, something was said that just I really want to like start off with before we go anywhere else, because he told a lie. Okay. Now, I already dealt in a video where he lied about C.I. Scofield. He tried to paint Scofield as teaching multiple ways of salvation and multiple gospels of salvation. But when you actually looked at the text in his Scofield study notes in Revelation chapter 13 and 14, it was saying gospel meaning good news, and that there were aspects of the gospel and not gospels of salvation. So just there's multiple aspects of the good news. That's all they're saying. But he wanted to make sure that all dispensationalists are painted as heretics. And, some things you got to point out. Sometimes there's a little bit of a difference of interpretation, and then there's just flat out trying to attack people and lie about people. And that's a sin. So, in this one, I mean, there could be like some error, but, Burris always says that he's the smart, he comes out like, I'm going to be the smartest guy in the room, and that's it. Well, then he should know. Okay. But so that you know, I'm going to read this passage. This is the preface. Okay. This is a Holy Bible, New King James Version edition. This is or New King James Version, the New Open Bible Study edition. And in verse, I'm going to read this passage that'll start in page 13, and we'll move on to 14. Okay. And so we're talking about the Old Testament text of the New King James Version. The Old Testament text, the Hebrew Bible, has come down to us through the scrupulous care of ancient scribes who copied the original text in successive generations. By the 6th century AD, the scribes were succeeded by a group known as the Masoretes, who continued to preserve the sacred scriptures. For another 500 years in a form known as the Masoretic text. Babylonia, Palestine, and the Tiberias were the main centers of Masoretic activity, but by the 10th century AD, the Masoretes of Tiberias, led by the family of Ben Asher, gained the ascendancy. Through subsequent editions, the Ben Asher text became, in the 12th century, the only recognized form of the Hebrew Scriptures. Daniel Bomberg printed the first rabbinic Bible in 1516 and 17. The work was followed in 1524 and 25 by a second edition, prepared by Jacob Ben Chaim, and also published by Bomberg. The text of Ben Chaim was adopted in most subsequent Hebrew Bibles, including those used by the King James translators. So the King James Bible is translated from the Masoretic Ben Kayim edition. The Ben Kayim text was also used for the first two editions of Rudolf Keitel's Biblia Hebraica of 1906 and 1912. Now, since the King James is translated in 1611, I don't think Rudolf Keitel was editing their Hebrew Bible. Let's go on. In 1937, Paul Kale published the third edition of Biblia Hebraica. This edition was based on the oldest dated manuscript of the Ben Asher text, the Leningrad manuscript, B19A, 81008, which Kale regarded as superior to that used by Ben Kayim. Superior, different. Okay. This is for the New King James Version. The text used was the 1967-1977 Stuttgart edition of Biblia Hebraica, with frequent comparisons being made with the Bamberg edition, 1524 and 25, the Septuagint Greek version of the Old Testament, and the Latin Vulgate were consulted. So they would make their decisions looking at these translations and then trying to kind of find more variety than the Hebrew Bible as it was preserved up to the King James translators. And it says, see here. In addition, they were referring to a variety of ancient versions of the Hebrew Scriptures. The New King James Version also draws on the resources of relevant manuscripts from the Dead Sea caves. So, once again, it is a lie to say that the New King James Version is using the same Old Testament as the King James Bible. Okay? So when he says that, okay, maybe he's making an error and he's just an arrogant blowhard. But if he's as smart as he proclaims himself to be, then he's just lying to people. It's just what it is. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and give me just a second here. All right. Sorry about this. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at this text that has all the controversy. All right. Psalm 10, verse 5. His ways are always grievous. Thy judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. Okay, so always grievous is translated always prosperous. Okay, by the other versions. Now let's look at the context. Why standest thou? This is verse 1. Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in the devices that they have imagined. For the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire, and blessed the covetous, whom the Lord abhorreth. The wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. His ways are always grievous. The judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. All right, and I'm going to stop short there. We'll go a little bit further. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing, and deceit and fraud. Under his tongue is mischief and vanity. All right, may God bless the reading of his word. So, we see this wicked person, okay? And when we deal with this situation, with the Bible, we have different views of bibliology, okay? Now, so what McElroy fits what we call a Ruckmanite profile. I think Burris tries to say differently. I've talked a little bit with Jack, and I think he is a follower of Ruckman. Also, he's a follower of Gail Riplinger. I know he said that much here recently. I looked. Um, and he's an interesting guy. But McElroy or well, I like to say that, but people are saying McElroy, so maybe that's the way I say it. Well, anyway, McElroy, he is not a classically trained seminary pastor guy. He's actually, interesting, a fairly successful businessman. I saw one of his YouTube videos where he interviewed Eric Trump, Donald Trump's son, and Eric kind of came in off a helicopter, kind of pretty neat, but that's what he is. He is a layman, okay, and he's passionate about the topic, and essentially he's going to have a worldview that kind of provides things in a certain pattern. So that is the Ruckmanite says that the Hebrew and the Greek are corrected by the English. Okay, Burris kind of said that that wasn't the case. I really don't think so. I think McElroy is definitely more more of a Ruckmanite. Well, anyhow, you have typically, you have the Ruckmanite view, which is the English was inspired. Then you have the preservationist view, which is that the Greek and Hebrew behind the King James are inspired and preserved. Okay. Um, and then some King James onlyists are in the middle. And what they'll do is they'll say it was preserved and perfectly translated. Now, his attack is a very clever, very strong attack. Okay. I'm not going to lie. But it actually is only dealing with a sliver of the King James only movement. And what happened was when he goes over this, he says, let's look at the Logos software. Well, I know his buddy Mark Ward is working for Logos. I know that word on the street is that he's worked professionally with Mark on a couple projects, so it's interesting. Yeah, let's look at this. Yeah, copyright infringement. Anyway, okay, so he what he does, he says, look, he said, here is, it's not just like a new version thing. Let's look at Hebrew, okay? And he said, I noticed that the New King James goes with the other new versions. I just explained to you, that's not necessarily saying anything. But, um, I looked and found different groups that were, focused on the Masoretic text. And typically, they didn't. What was it? They did go with this reading of prosperous. Okay. Now there are other words that get used, and I'll explain that in a second. But what he says is that okay, well you have these two words, prosperous and grievous, and they're contradictory. They just have to be contradictory. I think he waffled a second on that, but that's kind of his case. Right, so you got two contradictory things. So where did he get it? It's like, well, he got it from the Latin Vulgate and the Septuagint. And let's see here. Let me look here for a second. All right. Now, I'm going to look at a translation that's supposed to be faithful to the Latin Vulgate here. Okay, Dewey Reams. Right. And Lord is in his holy temple. No. Okay. But that looks way off. But that's might be something probably getting funky because of the Apocrypha, yes. Yeah, let's see. Okay, well, let's just take his word at it. Let's make it easier. Alright, so, where did you go, bud? There we are. Okay, so, that was his case, okay, and you went with the Vulgate, the Septuagint reading. Therefore, the King James is not faithful to the Hebrew, is basically what he said. Now, let me see here. Okay, so, um, theologically, if you are a Ruckmanite, you would believe that the English corrects the Greek and Hebrew, and I think that's kind of where, McElroy was coming from. In that case, he'd just say, this is the superior one, and that's it. Dun-dun-dun. It stinks to be you. um, and then, if you hold to a Texas Receptus position and Masoretic text, or traditional text position, then you would say, okay, well, the King James is wrong about that, but you just correct it with the Hebrew Masoretic text and the Greek Textus Receptus. And my position, I could go that route, okay? I think that there are places where, a reading would be better, but I don't, I am convicted that you can't just simply say, well, the King James translators maliciously wanted to distort the text. Okay. And that's the way he painted it. It's like, oh, well, they just wanted to go with this reading and they didn't care. They're, translations, man, it's translation. I mean, just like, okay, who cares? No, I think there was a reason for what they were doing. And also, here's what you have to understand. He kept on saying that, you believe the King James perfectly preserved the Greek and the Hebrew. No. I don't believe that the King James Version preserved the Greek and Hebrew at all. I believe the Masoretic text preserved the Hebrew, and the Textus Receptus preserved the Greek. And the King James Version translated those. Yes, I believe the King James Version is a translation. Okay, it is. So you treat it like a translation. It's not a perfect copy. They were not speaking, Elizabethan English or, actually it's King James English. King James. I mean, it's not. Queen Elizabeth's a little bit later. Hello. But yeah, they weren't trying to make perfect copies of Greek and Hebrew. They're trying to translate that in the English language, and that gives you a little bit of liberty. Okay. Now, overall, the King James is actually, very high level of word for word translation process. Okay, so they take a word, translate. But they did not do that in every single instance with every single verse. But they had a brilliant reason as to why, and that is that they would find things in the context. So we go back to McElroy's complaint, and that was that if you are always successful in everything that you do as a wicked person, well, that kind of sounds a little bit immoral compared to God's standards. And Here's something else, though. Look at verse 2, Psalm 10:2. The wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Okay? It's not just that he's like, oh, I'm so jealous of the rich, wicked guys. No, he beats them down. He persecutes them. This is very important. I was studying another issue, and this will be fun because he talked about Grady, and this guy Grady wrote another King James book, and he talked about the Nicolaitanes. And Laitanes means like the laity, and Nico is kind of similar to that word Nike. Okay, and Nike means victory. It also means to conquer. Okay, so this guy, it's not just that he's successful, it's that he's conquering. When you look at the Vulgate and the Septuagint as translations, okay, they are not to be looked to as a preservation of the text. But if we're talking about the topic of translation, they were conveying that. Now, let's look at this because this is an area, and it's kind of funny because they'll use this concept, but they usually use the concept if it's being negative about the King James. And so, like Mark Ward would talk about false friends. Okay. Now, let's look at the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. Grievous, all right, heavy, oppressive, burdensome, as a grievous load of taxes. So, it's not the opposite where, instead of him being successful, it's actually him being oppressive to people, okay? And of course, him being oppressive and him being successful in oppressing people, that actually starts to gel together a little bit. Let me look at, there's 7 definitions, but I like the 7th one. Hurtful, destructive, causing mischief, as grievous. Okay, and he gives an example as grievous wives in Acts 20:29, which that was, for I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Oh yeah, it's grievous wolves. So here it is again. Grievous is conquering, it's oppressing. Okay. And so yeah, he's successful. He's successful, he is conquering. Okay. He's oppressive, he's grievous. So that's a term that we don't usually use that term as much today, and if we use it, we might not use that definition of the term. So basically, we're the King James translators trying to, deceive people. No, they're using a term at that time, and it fell out of favor, so other translators didn't translate it that way. But they were saying that according to the context of the scripture. Now, let's see here. Heck. All right. So, going back to it, one thing that Jack McElroy does make a point of is, what is God trying to say to people? Is God really trying to hide the Bible from people? Is God trying to confuse people? Why did God, use the majority in this direction? Okay. The majority of books on earth, the most popular book on earth, is the King James Version. The majority of the Greek manuscripts agree with the Greek of the King James Version. The majority of foreign language Bibles that were made before the printing press were in that direction. And the majority of missions and foreign language translations were basically translations of the King James Version into foreign languages. Was God trying to fool people? Or was God just kind of saying, who knows what's going to happen? Am I going to be revealed? Am I not? Woo! You know, is that what you think of God? Is God involved in this process? Or is he just sitting on his hands somewhere? No, I think there's a reason that these things are written, a reason these things are done. And I don't mind. I think it's fair enough if somebody wants to make a translation, if it's faithful enough to the Hebrew and the Greek. But when the translator said they wanted to make a good translation better, and this was the authorized, this was the Holy Bible, this was meant to be the standard. I know a lot of translators say that, but they actually were. They were the standard of English translation for all English people. That's why the English king sent forth that project. But it wasn't he that authorized it was God working through the churches. All right, I'll catch you later.